I thought David Cameron even looked almost embarrassed that he was there as a sort of acting head of government. A bit of déjà vu for him because that's exactly what he was doing uh,
Mm.
a few years back. I think it was strange. I would have thought optically not good for a prime minister who would normally be expected to want to enjoy the moment in the international limelight, not to be there. A little odd also for his foreign secretary to be standing there, especially a former prime minister taking his place. And I'm afraid just optically, it looks wrong that the Prime Minister thought it was more important to go and give a pre-recorded interview about domestic politics on such an important day when you are commemorating thousands, tens of thousands of your war dead.
So, Peter Westmacott, the Prime Minister's apologised, but was there any justification for him leaving early from this event to do a TV interview?
I think it was a very strange thing to do, to be honest. I noticed that the Prime Minister has said this morning that he stuck to an itinerary which was set for him before he called the election. Does that mean that they always planned for him not to be at that last major international event at Omaha Beach? I don't know. I would be surprised because the plan must have been that he would do the British ceremony, of course, and then he would be there for the international one, even if he wasn't there for the American one and the Canadian ones in the middle, which the Prince of Wales attended. So I think it's a strange thing to have done with or without an election, particularly at a time when international tensions are so high and when President Biden was going to make such a clear link between fighting tyranny 80 years ago and the importance of allies sticking together and fighting tyranny today in 2024.
I mean, it looked odd, didn't it, that, the former Prime Minister was standing in those,
But
that sort of tableau of the global leaders.
yes, I saw that picture. I mean, I thought David Cameron even looked almost embarrassed that he was there as a sort of acting head of government. A bit of déjà vu for him because that's exactly what he was doing uh,
Mm.
a few years back. I think it was strange. I would have thought optically not good for a prime minister who would normally be expected to want to enjoy the moment in the international limelight, not to be there. A little odd also for his foreign secretary to be standing there, especially a former prime minister taking his place. And I'm afraid just optically, it looks wrong that the Prime Minister thought it was more important to go and give a pre-recorded interview about domestic politics on such an important day when you are commemorating thousands, tens of thousands of your war dead.
And what do you think officials would or should have said to him if if it was his decision to return early?
Well, we've got to bear in mind that he had recently called a general election, which does mean that an awful lot of planning of events gets, turned upside down. So, I don't know the full details of that. But my instinct, having been there myself 15 years earlier, would be that I, as the ambassador, would be saying, you do realize, Prime Minister, don't you, that if you're not there, people will be asking why, and our place will be empty. Well, not empty, but the British head of government, the British Prime Minister, will not be there for a very important international gathering. And I would have thought that the media handling people, the political handlers in Number 10, would also have seen that this was potentially something damaging. Of course, I don't know the full background. There may be some other considerations I'm not aware of. But most advisors worth their salt surely would have said to the Prime Minister, this is not a great idea.
And if he was let down by his advisors, is that any excuse?
Well, I have no idea whether he was or wasn't. I don't know what advice he was given, whether he took it or didn't take it. Ultimately, as he fully admits this morning, let's be fair, it's the Prime Minister takes responsibility for his own judgment and his own decision. And he said, I'm sorry, I think I got this wrong. So no, he's not seeking to apportion blame to anybody except himself. He has, rather graciously said, I'm sorry, I got this wrong. So it's his responsibility.
Do you think Labour is playing politics with it, though? I mean, it's been pointed out that Gordon Brown initially wasn't going to attend the 65th D-Day anniversary, and then he did a U-turn and went after all. Is there an element of, Labour seizing a chance here and making hay with it in a way that's maybe a bit undignified?
I don't recall a last-minute change of plan by Gordon Brown 15 years back. I do recall that the Prince of Wales, the then Prince of Wales, decided to come at quite a late stage after some of the British newspapers decided that the Queen had been snubbed by not being invited to the 65th anniversary. I thought the Prime Minister was always going to be there, but I may have got that wrong. Um, no, I think that whether or not this is being exploited politically, we are in a general election campaign, a very short one. It is a very important event, partly because of the international situation, and partly because this is the last time that a number of the heroes of the D-Day landings are going to be able to be there. So it's additionally poignant. And I think, just generally speaking, for the United Kingdom, especially after all the Brexit business that we've been through, and to some extent absent from the global stage, this was a great opportunity for the British Prime Minister to show that the UK is at the top table, and didn't take it for that part of it. So I think it's inevitable that a political opponent is going to say, this looks to us like an error of judgment. Is that, a bit of faux um, offense taken for political reasons? Well, maybe, but everybody is playing politics these days, as we've seen from the toing and froing over tax levels in the last few days.
In other words, it was a no-brainer for him to go and stay there.
It seemed to me, but I add the caveat that there may well have been considerations that I'm not aware of behind the scenes, which led him to make that decision. But optically, as of now, and I think probably in the Prime Minister's mind as well, because otherwise he wouldn't have issued an apology this morning, it turned out to have been a mistake.
When you talk about Britain on the international stage and so on post Brexit, how important are these kind of events? What did he miss by not being there?
Well, Kathy, they are very important. There's a degree to which it's all choreographed, and everybody knows who's going to go to which ceremony, at what time and in what order, and who arrives a few minutes before everybody else. All that's kind of, part of the stage management. But then there is the time that you spend with the other heads of government, heads of state, fellow allies, whether you're just shooting the breeze while you're waiting for the fly past or the next speech. I noticed, for example, President Macron speaking to the King, very animatedly. They sat next to each other in the row there while an anthem was being played. And there are all those opportunities. When President Obama was there with the Prince of Wales, it was the same thing. President Obama, Gordon Brown, Nicolas Sarkozy, they spend the time together, and it's about two things. One is about uh, consolidating relationships between the key leaders, and that is never time wasted. And the other is that there is sometimes an important international agenda. A few years back, if you remember, when the Ukraine crisis first began, there was something called the Normandy Group, which was put together of four different heads of government who were sent away and ended up with the Minsk agreements, which Vladimir Putin then disregarded. But it started out at Normandy, where heads of government had been together for D-Day ceremonials. So stuff happens in the margins of these gatherings, and you never quite know in advance when it's going to be useful, when it's not. But it's always time well spent to be with your fellow heads of government, heads of state, and especially under such an amazing blue sky and at such an emotional occasion.
So, yeah, and historically, these events can be a great moment, as you've just suggested with the Minsk agreement.
I think so. Quite often it's not all teed up in advance, contrary to what people think, that every single meeting between heads of government, it's all done in advance and leaked in advance. It isn't always. And when they come together on these occasions, G7 in Cornwall, if you remember, was a big event for Boris Johnson. Um, People are developing the relationships, and sometimes they are coming up with understandings or private or public agreements on important international issues. So yeah, they can be very substantive, as well as very good television and very good and rather emotional, if you like, saluting of the bravery of both the war dead and the surviving veterans.
So it's another knock to Britain's international self-esteem, really.
Well, I think probably not really. I think it was a missed opportunity, and I think there will be people saying, "Well, hang on, why was he not there?" The real point is that the king was there and spoke very good French and made a very powerful speech and talked about the death of French civilians, as well, and of the resistance fighters, and wasn't just celebrating the courage of the 80,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers who came ashore on D-Day. That was a very powerful message, which will have gone down extremely well in France, where they're devoted to the British royal family. So I think that the overall British presence, and Prince William being there and doing his stuff admirably, I think that's the main message, plus the red arrows during the fly past, and a powerful, emotional British commemorative ceremony. I just think it's a bit sad from the Prime Minister's point of view. I don't think the UK national interest has suffered from it, that he wasn't there to be a part of it for the whole day.
But it may have electoral repercussions for him.
Who knows?
I mean, you've been up close and personal with a lot of leaders and former leaders. What does it say about Rishi Sunak, the man, do you think, and his judgment?
People who know him much better than me and have worked with him in the past say that he's a very diligent, very hardworking, competent technocrat, made a lot of money, obviously, working for Goldman Sachs and so on. And I think Treasury officials quite enjoyed working with him when he was Chancellor. When he was chancellor. I think the questions have always been, what about the rest of the interest, the requirements, and the touchy-feely bit of being a prime minister? Is he really interested in the international side of things or not? He's obviously delegated that part of the job to David Cameron, who I think is doing a very good job. And as a former prime minister, he's got access and status and seniority and gravitas, which does us a lot of good, I think, actually, around the world. Um, does the prime minister not really want to be interested in that, or is he got his eye so focused on the election, which is about domestic issues? Let's be honest, that's not his highest priority. I don't know what it tells us about the individual, but I think the fact that he took that decision, or was advised to take that decision, and then the next morning said, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake," it doesn't look a resoundingly strong um, gesture of leadership, shall we say?
Do you think it has echoes of Michael Foot turning up at the cenotaph wearing a donkey jacket? Because that had some quite serious repercussions, didn't it, in terms of how people saw the Labour Party then?
It did. We all now remember the donkey jacket, as you say, just like we all remembered John Major's soapbox, which did him a power of good, interestingly, and helped him win an election nobody thought he could win. I think, to what extent this will have any lasting impact, I think nobody knows at this stage. I think for the moment it's a flurry, it's a story. We'll be moving on because we're an election campaign team, more stories very quickly, and I think only time and people's decision how they vote on the 4th of July are going to tell us whether this has a lasting impact.
Events and sort of symbolic moments tend to have a sort of outsized importance, don't they? When you look back at, you were mentioning the soapbox there, and you were mentioning we were talking about the donkey jacket. Something that might sort of be dismissed in a moment can end up still, having a resonance years later.
I think you're right. It can, and certainly if things are not looking good for you anyway, then a bad story. A bit like, do you remember Gordon Brown getting into his car, not realizing that the microphone was on, and
Yeah,
saying, "Who let me
yeah.
talk to the bigot?" That did him a lot of damage. Anyone can say something in the heat of the moment if they're annoyed. It was bad luck, but it was because he was a bit down anyway. I think this one, I think what is perhaps more damaging is that a lot of the criticism of the Prime Minister's decision not to stick around for the Omaha Beach ceremony comes from his own side, his own supporters, even his own ministers, his own cheerleaders. And I think you would expect it to come from his political opponents, but when it comes from your own team, it's probably more damaging.
So, Peter Westmacott, thank you very much.